announcing a bid to remove statues of controversial historical figures.
Yeah, this would include figures such as George Washington. Who knew he was controversial? Thomas Jefferson, Peter Stuyvesant, and Christopher Columbus. Fox 5's Reagan Menji is live in Columbus Circle with the details. Reagan, we've heard these conversations before. This seems like it's going just a little bit further.
Conversation again has been brought up, a conversation that's been occurring for years, and some historical statues like Columbus himself here at Columbus Circle on the chopping block once again. Not only that, the city council is looking to create a reparations task force. So the council's Cultural Affairs Committee will be holding a public hearing in a few hours. It is seeking legislation to remove all statues that depict a person who owned slaves, directly benefited from slavery, who participated in systemic crimes against indigenous people.
I still cannot figure out why it is that we are still having this ongoing conversation about statues. Now, you're probably thinking to yourself, I thought this issue was dead and buried, but apparently not, as the state of New York has decided to open up a task force for reparations. And one of the things they intend on doing is removing statues of George Washington and just about anybody and everybody who fought for the Union Army, especially some people who came from the state of New York who fought for the Union Army during the Civil War. Wasn't that war about, like, I don't know, freeing slaves? Of course, when you actually get to the minutia of the war itself, you kind of see that maybe it really was not entirely for that, but still at the same time, weren't slaves freed as like a result of this? Like, I'm just throwing this out here. Or wasn't the road kind of like paved for like civil rights and all that stuff? I mean, I'm just throwing it out there. Why it is that we have to remove the iconic statue of George Washington out in front of Federal Hall, which, by the way, was also used in Metal Gear Solid 2 in the very, very last scene, of course, when Arsenal gear crashed into Federal Hall, which, by the way, is where George Washington was inaugurated as president. But, of course, because he had a plantation and he owned slaves, of course, we got to bring this up. By the way, I brought up the Metal Gear Solid reference because I do plan on doing a project here in the near future asking the question if Hideo Kojima and the Metal Gear Solid series wasn't prophetic, because the more and more you look into it, there's actually a lot of parallels, especially from Part 2. However, the thing is this right here. It seems to me that this right here is once again being brought up for political reasons, political purposes. Of course, this is the reason why they use it. It isn't just statues of Confederate generals or statues of Confederates. A lot of it is exactly what former President Trump said after the whole Charlottesville ordeal.
Well, no, George Washington was a slave owner. Was George Washington a slave owner? So will George Washington now lose his status? Are we going to take down... Excuse me. Are we going to take down statues to George Washington? How about Thomas Jefferson? What do you think of Thomas Jefferson? You like him? Okay, good. Are we going to take down the statue? Because he was a major slave owner. Now, we're going to take down his statue. So you know what? It's fine. You're changing history. You're changing culture. And you had people, and I'm not talking about the neo-Nazis and the white nationalists, because they should be condemned totally. But you had many people in that group other than neo-Nazis and white nationalists, okay? And the press has treated them absolutely unfairly. Now, in the other group also, you had some fine people, but you also had troublemakers, and you see them come with the black outfits and with the helmets and with the baseball bats. You had a lot of bad people in the other group too.
This right here is total politics, complete total politics. And don't worry, I'll talk about what Trump said, and we'll see if there's any actual validity to it as of today. Because if you recall correctly, during the BLM protest, they were like tearing down every single statue they could. I want to say it was the state of Washington. They were tearing down statues of Jefferson. The same exact thing was going on in Oregon. There was also the statue of a Union soldier, Union officer, that was torn down in Madison, Wisconsin. Of course, this was during the BLM riots. This was, of course, during the whole Kenosha thing. Yeah, they were tearing down statues like crazy. It's almost as if to say these people are really and truly ignorant. Now, it's one thing to tear down Confederate statues, and of course, I've let you guys know exactly how I feel about that. I don't believe in tearing it down, which is one of the main reasons why it is I released a video a while back on Gear Issue 33. Don't worry, I'll link it in the description box, where it was that West Point, for whatever reason, they wanted to remove the statue of possibly America's greatest general, Robert E. Lee. Army. Of course, even though he did fight for the Confederacy, but also at the same exact time, he also served in the U.S. Army as well. And of course, after the Civil War was over with, the troops were, of course, brought back in, basically saying, look, let's go ahead and just kind of like repatriate everybody, bring things together, because that's actually what happens. That's what this nation is really and truly about when you actually think about it, is forgiveness. Even though a lot of people, of course, don't believe in second chances, and of course being woke is all about punishing one for something that they had said or done some 50 or 60 years ago. Almost like that time that ESPN wanted to go after Jerry Jones, owner of the Dallas Cowboys, because he was seen in a picture of a whites and blacks standing off. Of course, this was about Jim Crow in the South in Arkansas in 1957. Even though he was just an onlooker, we had to listen to Jay Williams come out and basically look like a crying mess, saying, I want Jerry Jones to, I don't know, renounce racism, even though he owns a company that employs a lot of black millionaires. We're not going to bring that back up. However, the politics of this entire thing has got to be talked about again. And of course, I did plan on doing a much, much larger project on this video next year. But obviously, just think of this video right here as a bit of a primer. So why bring it up? Well, you've got this immigration crisis. You've got a lot of black people in the city of New York, and the state of New York are not happy about the fact that their tax dollars, the very, very minimal amount of tax dollars that they pay, especially given them, I'm saying that because of the lower amount of pay they get at their jobs. The less overall amount of money that you get, the less overall amount of money that you pay in taxes. And of course, all these opportunities have been taken care of. People are being inserted into these areas, of course, by not the people of the city of New York's will. And obviously, this right here is a bit of a way to try to pander to somebody, to try to bring them back, to try to lighten the load. We will give you reparations, even though if you actually look at what's going on in the state, the cost of living, it makes you think that maybe something like reparations, of course, just would amount to absolutely nothing. Meaning that they may give you a $5,000 or $6,000 check, but at the end of the day, it's probably only going to be worth, with the current rate of inflation the way it's going, nothing more than a box of eggs. I'm just simply saying that your reparations check, of course, will amount to absolutely nothing. And I've done several videos on why is that I'm against reparations, because once again, you're separating people more and more and more. It just creates a much, much bigger divide. But statues. That right there is this right here is going to be our way of I guess, putting out the fire, lowering the temperature in the room, quelling your anger for all the people coming over and taking opportunities, the people who are taking over certain landmarks in the city that, quite frankly, you need at this moment in time, to basically interrupting your everyday life. So what we're going to do is we're just going to take down statues to make you less angry, and then we're going to create a reparations task force to basically give you practically nothing. So politics. This is just politics. Now, you probably think to yourself, well, if this right is really and truly all this is, then I guess the video should end here. No, I'm going to talk about this issue a little bit more, and I'll tell you the reason why. Do you guys remember back in June when I basically wasn't around for a few days, said I wouldn't be on the soapbox for a couple of days? I was going to be going out of town. I did not tell you where I was going. Well, I'm going to go ahead and tell you guys right now exactly where I went, and of course, I'm going to tell you right now why it is that this topic relates to this topic here. My mother wanted to go to Mount Vernon. Mount Vernon is the place that the home of George Washington, all the restorations, all the type of stuff. The fact there was a plantation, all that type of stuff there. We went there, and of course, a part of the deal on the trip was that on the way back, because Northern Virginia is typically the most north that I go most of the time, even though I did go to New York City last year in upstate New York. Very, very nice place. Of course, I've talked about upstate New York on several occasions. So you go up there, and a part of the experience was on the way back home, seeing how it was that it's technically on the way home, not too far out of the way. We would go to Jefferson's house, and we would obviously go to Madison's house too. Monticello and Montpelier are not that far away from one another. I mean, Monticello is expensive. I mean, if you go to Monticello, you are going to pay a lot of cash. Mount Vernon, not really that expensive, and James Madison's house at Montpelier is not that expensive either. Well, why in the world would I go to these places? Well, because I'm a bit of a history buff. I want to see where the founding fathers lived at and all that stuff there. But let me explain something to you guys. Let me kind of detail very, very quickly the experience. So at Mount Vernon, when you go there, every room you go into, the tour guide has got to hit you with the whole, these right here were enslaved people. Not slaves, enslaved people. They're being super, super, super woke. And the people, of course, who are the tour guides are like 18, 19-year-old college kids. Maybe one of them's like 20 or something. But obviously, they've got to stick to the woke script. However, throughout that entire ordeal, throughout the entire 2-hour tour, they left something very, very important out about this. Are you ready for this? George Washington, in his will, and remember, George Washington actually died somewhat unexpectedly. He caught something with his throat, and of course they ended up bloodletting him, and of course after a while he just died. They didn't expect him to die. It was kind of unexpected, even though he was in his mid-60s. But the thing is this right here. Washington, a soldier, a guy who actually even worked on the plantation from time to time, was actually pretty well in shape, actually had a relatively decent diet, even though he had wooden teeth. And, of course, many people were not expecting him to die. Well, in his will, he actually put in there that he wanted his slaves freed. Now, of course, the state of Virginia, of course, would not allow this, but still, at the same time, why would you put that in your will? Probably because George Washington, like so many others, wanted slavery to end in the country, even though he was a slave owner. They were handed down to it. So, obviously, he couldn't really do a whole lot about that, but he was hoping in his death that he obviously could have these slaves removed. Removed, I mean freed. Let go of. Here's your freedom. Go up north where slavery is not there. That's basically the first step. Of course, we got to talk about the Free Trade Act, of course, the Slave Trade Act of 1807, where Thomas Jefferson said no more brand new slaves. That's where it was the first step, because obviously the framers of the Constitution, the people who were actually voting on this, could not agree about it. So, of course, the Founding Fathers tried to find every which way they could to try to solve this issue, but, of course, it eventually just kept getting punted down the road. And, of course, eventually there was a Civil War, and even after the Civil War, there were still problems. I will acknowledge that. However, the mere fact that these people chose to leave this out was absolutely disappointing to me. So then you go to James Madison's house, and, of course, you go to Jefferson's house. And at James Madison's house, I thought we were going to get the same exact woke shtick from the same tour guide, older man in his 60s, New Yorker. Didn't say anything, didn't question anything. He brought up slavery. But the thing about the tour at Madison was this guy kind of led you through the actual trail. They led you through everything all the way through to the end. And it was actually a very good tour. No wokeness at all. He just simply reported that there were slaves there. He did not call them enslaved people at all. And at the very end, he actually told us what the original plan was. The plan was actually to remove the slave title from black women. The reason why they wanted to do this was so that way they could eventually breed slavery out. So therefore, these people could actually stay here as American citizens. Of course, some have argued that the Civil War itself, and of course I'm still looking into it, after the Civil War was over, they wanted to repatriate black people back to Africa. But of course, this would not happen. Black people were here. They live with us. We've grown together, especially here in the South, and that is a very, very, very good thing. Lots of friends of mine growing up were black. Lots of friends of mine today are black. I live around black people. They know my views. They don't give me any problems at all. But there are people out there who go out of their way to try to make this entire situation a complete, total nightmare and some very, very bad action on the platform. So a long time ago, I came across this YouTube channel, and don't worry, I will be linking it in the description box. The guy by the name of PaxTube summed this up in a response to Autuche's video. Here's a piece of it.
I used to be pretty staunchly opposed to the removal of Confederate statues. But living through the monument controversy here in New Orleans in 2017 changed my opinion. It's one thing to have a political opinion in the abstract. It's quite another to be heading home from work one evening and get caught in the middle of a huge street brawl between two groups of protesters.
This is all he says in regards to his change. It's rather unclear why two sides brawling over a monument would make you change your opinion about keeping one. While it does demonstrate there are those passionate for removal, it equally shows that he calls pro-monument groups out-of-town agitators and anti-monument groups locals, because this statement is hardly backed by evidence. One of the most influential groups pushing for Confederate monuments to be removed is Black Lives Matter. This group has a tremendous amount of nationwide funding and influence. They use this funding and influence to organize many anti-Confederate protests throughout the country. If there were indeed out-of-town agitators in Adam Schaff Films' hometown, they were at best on both sides. I also want to quickly address the thumbnail of his video. Flipping off the bust of a person who's been dead over 100 years? Stunning and brave, we're all very impressed. Now let's get to his arguments, which he presents by responding to pro-monument arguments.
Removing Confederate monuments is a slippery slope. What's next? Removing statues of Washington and Jefferson just because they owned slaves?
This argument is predicated on two assumptions. The first one is that as of early June 2020, the removal of Confederate statues has been a widespread phenomenon. This is demonstrably false. This map shows the location of all Confederate symbols standing before 2015 across the United States. Let's see how many monuments were removed in the Great Purge of the last 5 years. Oh. Seems most of the monuments glorifying the Confederacy are still standing. Not exactly a coordinated and conspiratorial campaign to scrub America clean of its Confederate history.
So here Adam Shea Films argues that so many Confederate monuments still standing shows that this can't possibly be some widespread phenomenon. But this is a silly point. These monuments are still only standing because so many people oppose their removal. If it were up to someone like Adam Shea Films and those similar in thought, all of these monuments would be removed. This is nothing more than demonstrating his own side's failure in accomplishing its goals in many places.
Shea Films is a guy who lives in New Orleans, Louisiana, so therefore you probably would think of, outside the fact that he was wearing a uniform and giving a bunch of dead people the middle finger, which is so stunning and brave, by the way. So absolutely, sticking it to the man. Don't worry, we'll get to this here more in a second. This guy right here makes a lot of these films. He's basically like the YouTube. He claims he's the ultimate YouTube historian here on the platform. But then again, though, I've watched a lot of his content and found a lot of fallacies, a lot of things that were wrong. Now, we'll give him some credit in certain areas. But at the end of the day, he just turns into a great big giant woke loser the more and more you watch his content. But here's the thing that really bothered me the most when I saw this response. You see, when he was talking about, at first, he was in favor of keeping statues, but then he ended up showing up to a protest or driving through a protest, and he very quickly changed his mind. Doesn't seem to me like this guy was very, very based in his beliefs. It seems to me like he tucked tailed and run right away. Now, I'm not saying you should get out of his car and go fight with these people or anything, but still at the same time, you see people getting upset because some people want to remove statues, and there's some other people in the crowd who want to keep the statues, which, by the way, you guys know my position. I've told you on several occasions. I think all statues should stay up for a multitude of reasons. The main one is that we need to see exactly where we came from. I also have kind of grown to the idea of not removing the statues and putting them inside of a building and not letting people actually vote on it right away, even though it's the undemocratic thing. But then again, though, I'm not a democracy guy. I'm a republic guy, because it creates the sense that maybe these Confederate generals or whatnot are being used as a pillory. Meaning that you go inside of a statue, you demonize them, you make fun of them, this, that, and the other. I think the statues need to be left up so that way people can kind of make their own interpretation. I mean, that right there would seriously be the right thing to do here. And something else that I want to say was said in that actual video, and maybe even that clip, and don't worry, I'll play some more to you guys here too, is that Shea is a pretty bad actor. He also would eventually go on to label the people at Charlottesville who are protesting on behalf of the people who actually lived in that city. We're not talking about the ones, the Antifa and the neo-Nazis and all those guys. Of course, this video is already going to get demonetized for even bringing this up. The thing is this right here. He went ahead and labeled most of these people out of town, yet the Antifa people, it turned out, we found out later on, they were the ones who came from in and out of town. And the efforts, of course, to remove the statues have been thwarted by a lot of people who were trying to keep the statues up, which, by the way, shows you exactly how, let's just say, how effective this move is. You know, if you go online and you just simply type in the poll numbers about removing statues, you're going to find something like what I'm showing you now. Roughly 80% of the American people are not in favor of removing statues. You will see about 50% are in favor of removing Confederate statues, but quite frankly, there are a lot of people in this country. And by the way, if you've done like myself and you've ever been somewhere like, say, Gettysburg or any Civil War battlefield, like, say, Fredericksburg, definitely Gettysburg because it's in Pennsylvania, you will come across people who are from up north from Pennsylvania, from New York. Like I said about Madison's home, that guy right there was a New Yorker, told us he was from New York. You can see it in his accent. You will find out that a lot of these people are very, very much in favor of keeping the statues up, even if they don't vote the same way you do. Don't worry, I didn't talk politics to this guy or anything like that, and he didn't know who the hell I was. Fact of the matter is this right here. Most people are not in favor of taking down statues, even though there is a percentage that's okay with taking down Confederate statues. There's a great big giant percentage that's not okay with it. The reason why is that people need to be able to see it and make their own decision on their own, interpret how it is. You have the freedom to do that here. And I understand that some people like to use the whole, well, if we start removing these statues, I mean, we're actually removing bits of our past, we're not learning. That kind of plays in a little bit in their argument. I can kind of see where it comes from, even though I still use the argument from time to time. Like I said, there'll be a much, much larger video on statues in the near future. But the fact of the matter at the end of the day is this right here. It's really and truly not that effective of a move unless you live in an extremely very, very blue area, which, as I said before, you've even got a lot of Democrat and lib types who are not exactly okay with removing the statues themselves. kind of seems to me like maybe it's a fruitless effort to even try. Maybe you guys should kind of give this entire thing. I mean, if a stone figure of a man who is dead offends you so much, I mean, it tells me you've got some serious problems. But of course, there was actually more in this video that I'd like to cover.
You don't start tearing down statues of historical figures en masse on shaky, controversial pretenses, and not have it have a ripple effect that extends to other historical figures. The reason these statues are under attack isn't simply because they were Confederates. It's that they were white people who put their own race first. This doesn't stop at the Confederates. They're simply a rung on the entire ladder being climbed by anti-white sentiment. As it so happens, not long after Adin Shea released his video, statues to George Washington, Ulysses S. Grant, Teddy Roosevelt, and a few other American historical figures were destroyed or removed. This was so embarrassing for his argument that he actually had to address it in a pinned comment to his video. In the comment, he proclaims that he's actually fine with those statues being removed. He thus abandoned the very point he made here, and the slippery slope argument is once again proven right.
Obviously a bit of a bad actor that's pretty much what I got from that little bit there. Now guys, I for the most part only included that in to kind of give you an idea of exactly why it is they do this. A lot of times it's about cashing in on something. These people, for the most part, don't really care about history. They love to bring up bad history, of course, so that way they can get a political point across, because anytime you say something regarding race, it automatically gins up certain groups, so that way they'll get on your side, of course, that they're being the Democratic politician. Now, I do want to address one more thing, and while I will not play this clip, I will definitely leave the video in the description box, because if I continue to take from somebody's channel, you guys know what the deal is. You don't want to take too much. Next thing you get a copyright claim. Here's the deal, which I don't think PAX2 would do that, but still at the same time, though, like I said, I'll leave his channel in the description box and the video too, so that way you guys can go subscribe to him. I advise you guys do. He's got a lot of good content, a lot of very knowledgeable content. I want to go ahead and say this really quick. One of the things that Altuche's films did say in his actual response, or whatever he did on statues, was he talked about America's history being bad and having a lot of very bad episodes. You're right. We do have some very, very bad episodes. However, comparing the bad episodes of our past to today, yeah, I think it's extremely naive. Let me explain. We are the abortion capital of the world. We are aborting kids at a ridiculously alarming rate. I've done a video on BRT. Of course, I have to use the acronym, because if you actually say black and then theory, and then of course YouTube will label it. And I talked about that, how it was that in reality what the hell is really and truly going on is that in the cities they're aborting black babies at an extremely ridiculous rate. That right there alone is going to get me in trouble. Like I said, this video has probably already been demonetized already as me making it. Fact of the matter is they've been trying to replace black people for a long time. The Democratic Party found a different way of doing it. They mostly did it through abortion and, of course, creating an environment where crime was absolutely rampant and the black murder rate's gone through the roof. This right here is a part of our history that, quite frankly, I don't think we should be proud of. This right here, to me, I think is way worse than what the hell happened in the 1860s. Also, to go on top of that, we're also kind of like the porn capital of the world as well. Not exactly something we should be peddling out there. We're also the capital of all kinds of other crazy ideologies and whatnot. Stuff that, quite frankly, 50 years from now, when the whole wokeness fad ends, a lot of people are going to make fun of the United States over. With that right there being said, guys, I don't think the statue thing is really truly that big of a deal, even though politicians are obviously going to make it a big deal for political reasons. But still, though, make sure you guys hit that like button so that way the video goes through the algorithm. Please also leave a comment in the comment section. I would love to get you guys' thoughts on this. Share the video, and I'll see you guys later.